Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to episode, I think, 5 of the series of book review of The Vampire, starring me and Leonora, the Lady Vampire. Good evening, Leonora.
The lady with microphone problems.
Yes, the lady with my. Well, no, your microphone was working fine. I could hear you perfectly. At every
Well,
point, I could hear you. It just you couldn't hear me.
it was super weird because the like StreamYard was telling me that my microphone was not working.
Hmm.
So
Weird.
and then I was able to listen, like, to hear you when I just entered, and then nothing. So
Hmm.
I yeah.
Any, anyway, for those
We're
of you
here.
in the future, yeah, for those of you in the future that have no context for what's going on here, we are starting about a half an hour late because there were sound problems and communication problems, and I was literally about to just end the show and scrap it for tonight, and we'll do it another night when Leonora popped in, and now everything's working. So here we are. So good evening, everyone. Those of you that have joined us and stuck around: Spoonie the Rebel, Spud Gun, Kiefer Dam, Stoka, Random American, Anthem Ward, and anybody I might be missing who's either lurking, like Lurking Gopher, or in the future. Good evening. All right, so we are in the final stretch of Interview with the Vampire. We have stopped about midway through part 3, since there aren't really chapters in this book. And so part 3 took us from the wiles of the Carpathians, Transylvania, and zompire hunting, straight to the wonderful world of Paris. Holy cats! Brett-eyed Stoka, thank you so much. That is
Ooh,
ridiculously generous of you. Thank you.
thank you.
I appreciate it. Now I can put little heart symbols on these things too. Dude, thank you so much. By the way, before I forget, also speaking of generosity, at the top of the chat box, there's a link there to help our friend Maddie with deductibles for paying for her cancer treatment. I'd appreciate if you guys take a look at that. If you can donate, thank you so much. If you can't donate, that's fine. Please do share that out on social media if you're able to. And again, thank you, Brett, so much for that. I really appreciate it. Hope you enjoy the show, and thanks for sticking around. So part 3 takes us to the wonderful world of Paris, and we finally get to some of the more sticking mostly accurately to what we saw in the book, in the movie, or vice versa. Not quite sure where to start with this because my thoughts on it aren't event specific so much to a degree, but just sort of like the interactions between Louis and Armand and the other vampires, and what that did for the characters. But before I get into that, what did you think about the section we read so far?
Mm, well, this part definitely moved the story forward. Uh, because the the part that we just talked about last week, we came to a conclusion that it could basically not exist and we would be good. But
Yes,
this
yes.
part is starting, like, to move the story forward, and we are able to learn a little bit more about like the story about other vampires, and to learn a little bit more, because as our characters we are completely uh like in the dark regarding to knowledge about uh like vampires in general. So because Lestat did a very lousy job helping us with that. So yeah, so I think it's an interesting part. It has a lot of things I that I enjoyed, and also it also states again one of these types of philosophical um like debates around evil this time, no, and
Mm-hmm.
and and God and the devil. So it was interesting.
Yeah, the thing that well, first a couple things. First and foremost, we found out what the name of the zombie vampires are. The term for them, they're called revenants. Now, why they are
Mm-hmm.
the way they are isn't explained. That was all we know is that they're given names and they have a something. I think he said something to the effect of impure blood or something like that. But that's all we know.
Mm-hmm.
So as far as the extended lore of the whole thing and what the purpose of chapter or part 2 was, that's basically as far as we get. But so in this chapter, we have those scenes from the movie where Louis is walking down the street in Paris, and all of a sudden there's a figure behind him that's miming his every move and copying him step for step, and then sort of fooling around with him. And Louis gets frustrated and calls him, what do you call him, a fop? Or no, it was something else. Dang it, I forget what it
No,
is. Buffoon. That's what it was. He called him
a
buffoon.
buffoon. Yeah.
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
and apparently that becomes far more significant later. And this is the character known as Santiago, who was played by Stephen Ray in the movie. And there's a couple of things. First and foremost, even after reading all of this and meeting Armand the vampire and everything, I don't understand why Armand is so appealing, save for the fact that it seems like he has some supernatural charisma that he's just weaving over them that makes him more appealing, because there's not a whole lot given to us about the character
Mm-hmm.
that makes me think that he's all that much more significant to Louis than. I mean, I suppose next to Lestat, he's the most talkative and articulate vampire we've met, so maybe that's all there is to it.
Mm-hmm.
But Louis and then Claudia are entirely enamored by him for reasons that don't feel. I mean, to me, they didn't feel justified by the time that Louis and Claudia start arguing about it. Maybe that's just me.
Uh yeah, maybe you're right. I mean, I think the part that makes him like so appealing is the part that he has, well, as we later discover in the part that we read, that he has uh well, the most amount of knowledge that
Mm-hmm.
we could like ever find. He's supposedly to be the oldest vampire. Uh,
At 400 years.
yeah, at 400 years. So I think that that part uh makes him very attractive to Claudia, in the part that she's been like obsessed of trying to learn everything about vampires, and it attracts Louis in the sense that he's everything that he would wanted Louis to be, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah, because unlike the other vampires in his coven, for lack of a better word,
mm-hmm,
he's got some dynamism to him. He's
yeah,
got conscience, and he's got questions, and he's got a sense of curiosity about things, whereas the other vampires have effectively accepted what they are, revel in it, and they're kind of static, which
mm-hmm,
makes sense since they're also unaging, unliving monsters. But I think even in I can't quote it verbatim, but I think there's even a part in there where even Louis kind of admits that those vampires have figured it out. They've figured out that this is the existence and this is how to live, and um, they're living it in the most pragmatic way.
mm-hmm,
Whereas obviously it seems like that Louis and his conscience and his curiosity and his sentimentality and everything are always going to make this existence a torture. Whereas Claudia knows nothing different. Armand's obviously accepted it, but also kind of sad that he's accepted it, and he's having a hard time. I think the problem for Armand is that he wants to remember what it feels like to be the way Louis is now, but he can't generate it himself. He needs Louis as like a muse for those emotions or for those ideas. That's what I kind of got from it.
yeah. Well, imagine living like that for 400 years. I think you get numbed at at some point, right?
Yeah, and I guess that's Louis' superpower, is that he doesn't, even after living,
Mm-hmm.
150 or whatever years at this point, he just hasn't lost his connection to his humanity. And every time I'm talking about these themes, I obviously, for those of you in the chat that know otherwise, I'm thinking back to the main themes of Vampire the Masquerade. I know I keep bringing that up, but it is unavoidable to me because my pedigree comes from that game. And so, anyway, so Louis meets Santiago, who then leads him to Armand, and then Armand invites him and ostensibly Claudia to the Theater des Vampires,
Hmm.
where just like in the movie, we see effectively what plays out the same way in the movie, where there's this show going on of vampires pretending to be vampires in a stage play and doing all these things. And the big climax of the show that they're at is they bring a completely innocent and uninvolved person, lady, onto the stage, and the audience thinks she's part of the show, conceivably, and then she is progressively degraded and unclothed, and then eventually fed upon by the group and killed.
Did.
And as Louis is watching this happen, he, of course, because he's Louis, has this long, drawn out, emotional response to watching this lady and her predicament. And he falls in love with her, and she's so beautiful. And it's just like, oh my God, this guy. And, you know, if I was the interviewer at this point in the interview process, I'd probably be getting a noose ready, just like I'm about done. It really reminded me of that movie Airplane, where the main character's like sitting there and he keeps telling his backstory to people, and they keep finding ways to exit this life rather than keep listening to him. But yeah, so they watch this show happen and everything else, and has this big reaction. And Claudia is in this part almost a non-participant. Like she's
Hmm.
almost, I mean, in most instances, she's kind of pushed to the side. At one point, after the big show, they're taken on a tour of the rest of the theater, and there's like a sort of, just like in the movie, there's kind of an underground or lower level with like a ballroom and some extra rooms. And they go to Armand's room, and Claudia just is like sat in the corner like a China doll doing nothing but just kind of staring off into space while Louis and Armand are having this long, drawn out exchange. And it's kind of explained later on that, yeah, they're both experiencing some kind of aura or some kind of vibe that
Hmm.
Armand's putting out that sort of like entrances them,
Yeah.
which again reminds me of things from the role playing game. Um, but even with that awareness of it, you'd think that then you'd, I mean, at least I would, if I suddenly realized that I was being unnaturally influenced by his charm or whatever, if I had that awareness, I think I'd become more suspicious of the guy and not wanting to be around him more, because I'd understand I was being manipulated, but apparently that doesn't matter to anybody. I don't know. Maybe that's just me.
Well, I think that again, it's. I think that Louis was, like prioritizing what in that moment was like more important. Uh, he definitely wanted to know more,
Yeah.
about first of all Armand, and then know more about, what is a vampire, where do we come from. Ooh, on all the details that Lestat failed to share. And I think, and I even think that it's mentioned like quickly somewhere, that he's willing to take that risk, even though later on also he has this conversation with Claudia, and Claudia tells him that she's aware that Armand wants him for himself,
Yes. Yeah.
and that probably he's planning on get rid of her. And
Mm-hmm.
even with that, like statement or news, Louis decides to, okay, well, see you later. you know so, I
Yeah.
think it's more part of trying to get to the bottom of what they came to Europe. in a sense that's the purpose of the trip, apart from escaping from Lestat, because they just kill him.
Yeah, but even Armand in that first conversation basically admits that he doesn't really know all that much more to tell
Hmm.
than Lestat. I mean, he's lived a long time, but he admits he hasn't like learned some kind of secret. He doesn't know some great truth.
Hmm.
They talk a lot about evil and the nature
Hmm.
of it and everything else, but
Yeah.
beyond that, it's like, well, what is the draw to Armand except for the fact that I guess either he's manipulating them emotionally,
Yeah.
supernaturally, let's say,
Hmm.
or there's maybe the promise that he can teach Louis something. Plus, I mean, after you've spent 150 whatever the years it is at this point for Louis with the
With
same
the same
five,
person.
yeah, the same 5-year-old spinster. I mean, I guess you get kind of bored. It's like, well, there's nothing new to be had here. Obviously, Claudia can't teach me anything about being a vampire because everything she knows is everything I've taught her and Lestat taught her.
Yeah.
But anyway, but then also as wasn't really broadcast in the movie as well as it is in the book.
Hmm.
Armand makes Louis aware that there's a lot of questions about the two of them, like why they don't mention who made them and why was this girl made so young, and the other vampires are very, very skeptical and very suspicious and just looking for an excuse to take these guys out, even though supposedly killing another vampire is the highest crime amongst them.
Hmm.
The other vampires of the coven or whatever don't seem to have a whole lot of hesitation if they had an excuse to take out both Louis and Claudia. But Louis doesn't do himself any favors by being very coy and being very evasive about who made him and what their situation was and how they got here and all that kind of thing. Armand's willing to look past this, but Santiago and the others in the group decidedly are not. And so Louis goes back to visit Armand, and they have another conversation. But Armand's like, "Okay, you need to leave by the side exit.
Hmm.
You can't be seen leaving here. They're suspicious. Um, you'd best get out of town," kind of thing. Uh, and Louis like, "Okay." And then of course, where are they going to go at this point? And then
Hmm.
he leaves, and then the most bizarre, I ended up reading this last chapter, this last portion
Hmm.
out loud because it is so thick and it is so all over the place that I just my brain just took a vacation. And by the time I got to the end of the section, I was like, what? Wait, I was like, wait, what happened? So then I went back a couple of pages and I literally laid there on the couch this afternoon and I read it out loud to myself to make sure I wasn't missing anything. So, but anyway, that little bit aside, that might have had something more to do with my sleepiness. But yeah, so Louis walking back to their apartment at this or their room or whatever at the hotel, but then he decides to just keep on walking. He sees Claudia up in the window, but he needs to keep walking and clear his head or whatever. And then as he's walking down this misty and abandoned road or whatever, all of a sudden this man appears. And out of nowhere, this man is like, comes up to him and is like, "Yes, come with me." And he puts his arm around Louis's waist, and Louis like, I don't know, off in a dreamland or something, and just goes along with this guy off to his house, and where he sits him down and starts drawing a portrait of him. And I'm like, what? I'm like, is this part two? Part two? Like, why
Yeah.
are we here? What is happening here? But there's this long, pages long, really wordy, just adventure of sights, sounds, feelings, words all over the place of Louis having the experience of having been effectively gently kidnapped by this guy and taken off to the guy's art studio where he sits him down and starts trying to paint him. And eventually Louis like, "I'm out of here." And he bites the guy and basically leaves him for dead. And he thinks he's dead, and he sees the portrait and the portrait that was being made. He's like, "Oh my God, this is a perfect representation of me. And it's got all these elements of my being. And I haven't seen myself like this." and da 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 da. And just like he basically falls in love with the piece of art. And again, for those of you in the chat that know the game, it's like I'm reading a Toreador looking at a piece of art that they can't look away from. But then the man, as he's leaving, like grabs him by the leg and says, no, you must leave it. You must leave it. He tries to get the painting back, even though he's like bleeding out on the floor. And Louis is like, no, mine. And then he grabs the guy and kills him. And that's the whole set. And I'm just like, and again, I gotta get to the end of it, because the last sentence of the section is, I tore the painting loose from him and, wrenching him up to my lips with one arm, gashed his throat in rage. Quotation mark, period, end. And I'm like, why are we here? What was the point? I mean, what? I mean, there is a little bit of a motif about paintings and representations of people in this part. It's true, because when he's down there in Armand's little hidey hole or whatever, Armand has a painting, like an old sort of religious painting or whatever, of the devil hanging above his little mantle or whatever. And there's some commentary about that, about, is that you, or, is this supposed to mean something? So after I finished it and I was going like, did I just read part 2 again? I was thinking, okay, let's try to give some credit where credit is due to the author scribe. Okay, is there, and then I thought about that for a second. Like, is there a connection here between the painting and the painting with Armand? And then I stopped and I kicked myself in the teeth, because I was like, I'm turning into my college professor. Shut up. Sometimes the bowl of soup is just a bowl of soup, you idiot. So anyway, what did you think?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it was a waste of pages just to say, like, in my opinion, like he was still confused about what he wanted to do, because he had the option of staying with Armand, but that meant to get rid of Claudia, and we know what we mean with getting rid of her. Because he knew that if he stayed with Armand, even though everybody knew, like, he had killed Lestat, he would be safe. But he's not so sure about that option, and he still wants to stay with Claudia, and he's heading to their hotel, but he's still not ready, like, to be with Claudia. So he decides just to go, into the dark streets of Paris, and finds this guy, and it's the perfect excuse just to waste around, I don't know, 5 or 6 pages, basically, because he would have stayed in a, like, in a park or whatever, and it would have the same effect, at least on me. So yeah, part 2 of part 2, filler pages, or just 2. It was a lousy attempt of the writer to make us feel, a little bit more in sync with Louis' tormented things that was happening. It's
in movie terms, it completely interrupted the pacing, because at that point he should have,
totally.
the section, such as it was, should have ended with him looking up at Claudia in the window and us just understanding his conflict between what does he do about her, because he loves her, and however he loves somebody, he loves her, but he also knows that there is no future for him just tending to her.
Yeah.
And like you say, the other vampires would not allow her to continue to exist, because, as Armand says, and as is said in the movie a bit more succinctly, I don't think the line "it is forbidden to make one so young" is actually in the book so far, but it is mentioned that you don't make one who can't take care of themselves, etc., and so forth. So but yeah, so he'd be under Armand's protection. But so yeah, do I go off with someone who can take me onward into this existence, or do I stay with the old bag, the ball and chain forever. It's I'm sure there are all plenty of real world relationship examples you could put in place of this conflict. But yeah, and then we have this distraction of the art thing. I think I don't know. So far, we've had a musician who got completely abandoned and tortured and killed. Then we have an artist who's just plying their trade being taken advantage of and murdered. Does Anne Rice hate everybody that isn't a writer? Does she have an antipathy for artists in general that just aren't her? Or maybe she's jealous that she's not a musician or a painter. Maybe that's it. And she's trying to like get revenge against her own insecurities. I don't know. I'm doing a little bit of armchair psychology there.
Yeah, I mean, like, definitely, I feel it would be better, like, to, stop at the scene where he sees Claudia, like, in the hotel, and then he just goes in the city, and it just go on a killing spree, like something like that. It would be, at least a little bit more shocking, or more, I don't know. I could have understand him more, and his distress, and his, like, affliction of having to choose, or by doing something that is completely unnatural to him.
You know what would have been, and this might have been way cheesy. I don't know. You tell me. What would have been more interesting is if without saying it directly, yeah, he sees Claudia up in the window, and then he just, like, in frustration, starts stalking the streets of Paris, and then he comes across a young woman, let's say, and not a child, but someone that, at least by their stature and their age, is effectively a representation of Claudia. And he just murders her. He just completely slays her because he's trying, like, not only out of frustration for his predicament, but also, like, maybe in the back of his mind, he's trying to test himself. Could I actually do it? Could I do it myself? Because Louis would not want to leave her to the mob. Right.
Yeah.
He wouldn't. I mean, if I'm getting his sentimentality and everything else, if anybody's going to snuff out Claudia, it probably should be the loving arms of Louis. So in my mind, that would have been a bit more. Both, it would have lent to the horror of the whole, stalking the streets of Paris as a vampire. Would have also led into the psychology of Louis trying to balance this dilemma in his mind. To me, that might have seemed, maybe that's too ham-fisted. I don't know. Maybe that's too much, but that would have made more sense to me than portraiture kidnapping. It just, yeah.
Yeah. Well, at this point, whatever.
Yeah, I know. We're almost done. We're almost done. All right. So, any other thoughts on this section? Any other observations or anything?
No, like I said, I enjoyed this part. Just the last 5 pages, I think they were unnecessary, but I mean, we had that before. But like I said, I think we are moving forward, so that's nice.
Yeah, and again, the only thing that I'm still more curious about than anything else, since it wasn't in the movie, is I want to know more about the zombie vampires. I want to know more about the zombie. Where do they come from? How do they work? I hope they're explained at some point, maybe in a future book or something. But all right, everyone. Well, with that.
No, chat.
Oh, yes. Well, I mean, give me a second here.
I'm sorry.
Hold on. With that, we're going to stop our commentary. Give me a second to collect my thoughts, why don't you? But yes, what does chat have to say? Amy Minty, my DEI training tells me you can't kill vampires. Vampires are people too. What kind of DEI training are you taking? Is that like
vampire DEI training?
That'd be like VEI, Vampire Equity and Inclusion.
Yes.
I don't have. I know 3 jokes. I don't know anything. Let's see. Dr. Key knows Louis is a total sap. I don't know who Dr. Key is unless that's something I'm missing. But yes, Louis, I mean, I guess Louis is necessarily a drama queen because otherwise, the way the other vampires operate in these stories, they'd just be boring. They would just be like, yes, I kill people. Hello, my name is Armand. And yes, I kill people. You know, it's what I do.
Yeah, talking about that, I think that also a little bit of like a tweaking that Anne Rice made for the movie is that, well, at least I don't uh see Louis in the movie as whiny as he is in the book. You know?
Well, we spend a lot more time with him in the book, and a lot more time in his head. So, you know, but yeah,
I don't perceive him like that in the movie. Like
no,
not once. You know?
No, yeah, no. The events move way far more quickly in the movie, and the amount of time that we're given, or the movie gives to Louis to lament his existence and everything, have very specific moments in the film, and they're very dramatically appropriate. It's not prolonged. We don't dwell on it forever. And when he does have an emotional reaction to something, it's usually well deserved, like when Claudia eventually gets killed, or you know, when Lestat is like putting Louis to the test of turning Claudia in the first place. In fact, most of Louis's emotional cues in the film all deal around Claudia. So, and I think, and that was, I think that was by design, that she was supposed to represent sort of his heart and his hope and his sense of loss of his as a father, because unlike in the book, in the movie, Louis is lost his wife and child. So there's that dynamic that isn't even present in the book. Yeah, no, Louis is much more insufferable in the book than in the movie. I'll give you that.
Yes.
Yeah. Let's see. And Amy Minty, the greatest mistake that Anne Rice ever made was explain the mystery away. If you love her writing style, pass on Queen of the Damned. The promise of cake is better than actually eating it. Yeah, there is something to be said about that. There is something, a sense of mystery and not necessarily getting the answers to certain questions is sometimes better and leaves it to the imagination. You explain things too much, and it kind of ruins. I'm thinking specific. All this for some reason. You know, some of you out there may or may not get this reference. The game Dead Space. There's if the game Dead Space had no sequels, I probably would have preferred it, because the more that they went and tried to explain exactly what was going on, the more stupid and ridiculous it became. And some things need mystery. Some things need to have no clear answer. Thank you, Kieverdam, again. I'm Dr. Key. I used to go by Dr. Kiev when the whole Dr. Jill Biden thing happened. Oh, that's right. Oh man, I haven't thought about that in a long time. That reminds me of Lords of the Night territory, and I haven't thought about that in a while. So yeah, okay, I got you, Dr. Key. It's almost like Dr. Tran. If you guys know who Dr. Tran was, you're old on the internet. What can I tell you? Thank you, Kieverdam. Appreciate it. Also, Kieverdam, thank you again for providing the fundraiser links for both Maddie. And by the way, for those of you that are keeping track, Tracy, Twisted Skipster's friend Tracy, she got her needs met and no longer needs the fundraiser. So congratulations to Tracy. But at the top of the chat box, we have a link there to help out Maddie with her cancer treatments. So if you could take a look at that when you have a chance. Let's see. Assassin of the Gray. Louis, in addition to his nonstop whining, was never very bright. He's far too idealistic and romantic for his own good.
Yeah.
That's I will certainly admit to that. And when it comes down to vampire pragmatism, I think I appreciate Santiago so far out of everybody. Maybe only second to Lestat, who obviously is the superstar of the entire thing. But yeah, Santiago's just having a ball. Right, he's just having a fun. And also the fact that Louis called him a buffoon, and Armand at one point tells Louis, it's like, hey, you shouldn't have called him a buffoon.
Yeah.
And this
hurt
reminds
his feelings.
Well, this is the thing. This is something that again, I cannot help but think about the lessons I learned in the Vampire the Masquerade game. You have to remember, these characters are immortal, and likewise their grudges remain the same as any person's would be, except they last a very, very long time. And when you have a predatory pecking order, respect means something. It's almost a currency in and of itself. In the Vampire the Masquerade universe, vampires don't exchange goods and services using money. They have things called boons, and boons are publicly stated debts between vampires that people are held to and become part of their reputation and part of their connection one to another for favors done and favors owed and things like that. And if you renege on a boon, that reputation doesn't go away. Like that becomes permanent unless you do something amazing to try to overcome it. And so the system of dignitas and respect and so on between vampires is hinted at here, which I immediately understood as soon as Armand made that clarification to Louis. I was like, oh, dude, you're done. You're done. You spoke outside of your station. You have and honestly, Louis would have no idea about this, but he stepped out of turn there, and that's not good. It's hard to get back that ground once you've lost it. But anyway, anything else before we actually wrap up, Leonora?
No. Next week, we're finishing part 3, right?
Yep, we're going to finish off the book between now and for those of you that might be following along. What?
It's not the book. It's just part 3.
Well,
because we have part 4.
Part 4 is like 10 pages.
Okay, we will finish the book then.
I mean, it's no more than what we just read for this week.
It's fine. I just want everyone to know and to be on the same page.
Har. All right. So yes, I was mistaken. I thought there was just part 3. Okay. So yes, for clarification, we're going to finish part 3 and then finish all of part 4, which is fairly short, and therefore finishing the book for next week. And then we'll have our final review of this book. And at that time, we'll discuss the future of this series, and if we decide to do the Vampire Lestat afterwards. But everyone, thank you so much for joining us. Thanks for hanging in there through the technical difficulties.
Yes, thank you very much.
Yes, very much appreciated. If you have any comments on what we've talked about for this part of the book, please leave them in the comments below. If you would leave a like on the way out, I'd appreciate that. If you didn't like the stream, that's fine. Just leave a dislike. It's all counted as engagement, I think, by the algorithm in some way, shape, or form. Before I go, let me put a link to the Discord in the chat, just for those of you that might be coming on and don't currently have a Discord membership, as it were. Let me get it up here 1 second. I got to get my own technical things going here. There we go. This is why I should have planned ahead, but I got distracted. So yes, in the chat, there's a link to the Discord. It's good for 1 day. If you click on that, you'll find yourself on the landing page called Say Hello. And in addition to saying hello, you just have to say the secret word to go along with the stream to let me and the moderators know you watch the show. And today's secret word is portrait, because why not? Portrait. So if you'd like to join the Discord, go there, and then you can join in on all the fun. I added 3 new channels on the Discord yesterday for video games, books, and movies, in case you want to talk about video games, books, or movies. So anyway, everybody, thank you so much for joining us. Moderators, thank you for keeping an eye on things. Even though everyone here is so well behaved, you have very little to do. Everybody who donated, holy cats, thank you. Thank you so much for your generosity. Really do appreciate it, whether it was to myself or to Maddie through the link at the top of the chat box. Everyone, what was I going to say? I was going to say something nice. Yeah, sure. Have a good night. Have a good evening. Have a good rest of your Sunday. Have a good week ahead of you. Leonora, thank you for joining me as well.
Thank you. Thank you for listening.
And everyone, I hope you're all safe and well. If you're not well, please get well soon. And we will see you on the next one. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.